we'll be studying the narrative. So it says, عن أبي بكر عن أبيه قال كنا عند رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم فقال ألا أنبئكم بأكبر الكبائر ثلاثا الإشراك بالله وعقوق الوالدين وشهادة الزور وقول الزور وكان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم متكئا فجلس فما زال يكررها حتى قلنا ليته سكت. So Abu Bakr, a famous companion of the Prophet, is reported to have said, once we were with God's messenger, and he said, should I not inform you about the three greatest of the major sins? They are associating with God, disobeying parents, and giving a false statement or a false testimony. And while he was saying this, God's messenger, peace be upon him, was leaning on a support. He then sat upright and continued to repeat these words until we wished that he became silent. And that he becomes silent. So you can clearly see, viewers, here that the three major sins are spelled out by the Prophet. Of course, when the question was raised before him, he said that I'd like to inform you about the three great sins which a person might commit, and the first of them is shirk, polytheism, or associating partners with God. Of course, this is something that the world has remained alive to many centuries ago, before the coming of Christ, I would say, and even before that, we find the world sunk in the filth of paganism and polytheism. There were so many gods. Romans had so many gods. The Greeks had so many gods, and so many other gods we can find in the Far East as well. It was this revolution which was actually brought about by the prophets of God later on, and finally, when Jesus came right at the start of the first millennium of modern history, we can see that he was the one who actually lit this torch of monotheism in his society. And ever since then, from his time till the time of the last prophet, who was the Prophet Muhammad, this revolution in favor of the creed of monotheism was completed. And because of the fact that people, when they committed polytheism or they were guilty of this sin, the Almighty says that the reason that it regards them to be guilty of this, and the reason that it regards it to be an unforgivable sin, is that there is no proof of polytheism. Had there been other gods, the best person or the best being to inform them of these other gods was the Almighty himself. And without he informing us that there are other gods, without he informing us that there are some other partners that we have, if we impute partners to God, then we are doing something of our own wish. We are actually imputing falsehood to God. That is why the Quran says that shirk or polytheism is iftara Allah. It is a falsehood imputed to God, because we could have had no knowledge that the Almighty has a partner unless the Almighty himself conveyed this to us, and he never did so. That is why the Almighty is very severe and very harsh for people who deliberately deny the existence, who deliberately say that there are more than one God. And therefore, this is the reason the Almighty says that everything else can be forgiven, but a person who intentionally indulges in polytheism is a person who will never be forgiven on the day of judgment. And this is the reason. And next, it says that disobeying parents, akukul walidain. And here it needs to be understood, dear viewers, that in the Quran, we do find the fact that wherever parents are mentioned, at all places, the words which are used are treat your parents with kindness, wabil walidaini ihsana, which of course means that we have to be very, very gentle, kind, and sympathetic to them. We must not infringe on their rights. We must not be people who disobey them regarding their own rights. And here, disobedience must not be taken in the meaning in which it is generally taken, and that is, people think that the rights of a person in himself or herself can also be infringed by the parents. Thus, for example, people think that if the parents decide for the children regarding their spouses or their careers, and if the children do not obey them, then they would be disobeying parents, as is said here. This is not correct. The disobedience which is mentioned here is regarding the rights of the parents themselves. For example, if a parent is in a certain age in which he or she needs your compassion, he needs your company, he needs you as a dependent, and in those times you deny your parents these rights. It is this which is called ukuk, or disobedience. However, if your parents insist on a certain spouse or a certain career, this is something, if you disobey, is not disobedience of the parents, because this never comes in the rights of the parents. This is the right of the person himself or herself. So this is a point of note that we must all make, that parents themselves do have their rights, but they do not have the right to force their opinion on their children or on their surroundings. They, of course, can give their suggestions, they can pass on their experience to their children, but they cannot deny their children their own basic right, their own basic human right. And the word ukukul walidain, or disobedience of parents, must not be construed to mean that if a child, if a grown-up child does not listen to his parents or her parents regarding spouse selection or career selection, then he or she would be disobeying the parents. This was not the case. As I said, disobedience here actually refers to disobedience regarding the rights of the parents. And then it says false testimony. And false testimony, yours, you can clearly see, is something which all of us need to be very careful of. Because when we are bearing witness, we are in fact making the Almighty our witness. We are subjecting ourselves to the fact that this and this is the truth for which I bear witness. And for this, we know what the Quran has told us elsewhere. It has said that we must bear witness to the truth, even if it is against our own interests. وَلَوْ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِكُمْ أَوِ الْوَالِدَيْنِ, even if it is against our parents. So such is the nature of this testimony, this bearing of witness, that if it goes against our own interests, if it goes against the interests of our parents, of our relatives, of our kin, of our country, anything, it must not be succumbed to. It is the truth to which we must succumb. It is the truth that we must acknowledge, even if it means that we have to lose a lot of our wealth, or even some part of our own lives as well. So truth has to be held superior in all cases. And at one place, the Quran has said that you have to bear witness to justice and to truth even before your enemies. La yajrimannakum sha'ananu qawmin ala alla ta'dilu. You cannot be unjust to your enemies as well. Even for them, you have to bear witness to the truth. And subhanallah, this is one of the outstanding barometers and parameters which the Quran tells us, that even to our enemies, we must not be unjust. We must not bear witness to injustice. And I don't think there could be a higher standard than this, which has been set by the Quran. And here it has been explained by the Prophet himself. And you can see from the last part of this narrative, dear viewers, that the Prophet kept on repeating it. He said, the narrator says, Abu Bakr, who's the narrator, he says, when the Prophet was saying this last part, that do not bear false testimony, do not bear false testimony, he was laying back, he was reclining. And when these words were spoken, he suddenly came forward and started to repeat these words over and over again. And look what the narrative tells us at the end. فَمَا زَالَ يُكَرِّرُهَا حَتَّى قُلْنَا لَيْتَهُ سَكَتَ. That he repeated this so many times that all of us wish that all of the companions wished that he would go quiet. He would stop repeating these words, implying the fact that the Prophet stressed so much that giving testimony which is closer to the truth is so important. And I think that it goes without saying that bearing witness to the truth is fundamental to all practices. It is fundamental to our basic the human being in us. And we do pray that the Almighty does not bring us into such a trial. But if we have to pass through this trial to bear witness to the truth, then let us brace ourselves. Let us gear ourselves for the fact that if there comes a time in which we have to testify to the truth, come what may, even if we have to lose our own life, even if we have to lose a better part of our wealth, even then, saying the truth will be something which we will always uphold. It will always be dearer to us than every other thing. Now, let us go on to the third part of our study circle, dear viewers, and this is the Bible verse of the day. And this time there are actually more than one verse. In fact, 8 verses from the Gospel of Luke. This is chapter number 12, and I have titled it as Jesus Warns Against Greediness. As we all know, greediness is one of the biggest ailments that we human beings can suffer from. It actually makes a person blind to the needs of the society. He becomes an irresponsible person. A person who is greedy is always worrying about amassing wealth. He has no concern about the people around him. So here's what Jesus is reported to have said. So I'm just going to read out this passage before you. And one of the people said to him, Master, give an order to my brother to make division of the heritage with me. But he said, Man who made me a judge, a maker of decisions for you. And he said to them, Take care to keep yourselves free from the desire for property, for a man's life is not made up of the number of things which he has. A man's life is not made up of things which he has. And he said to them, he said to them in a story, the land of a certain man of great wealth was very fertile. Now, Jesus is actually recounting a parable, which he often does. So here comes the parable. The land of a certain man of great wealth was very fertile. And he said to himself, What is it to be done? For I have no place in which to put all my fruit. And he said, This I will do. I will take down my storehouses and make greater ones. And there I will put my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have a great amount of goods in store, enough for a number of years. Be at rest. Take food and wine, and be happy. But God said to him, You foolish one, tonight I will take your soul from you. Who then will be the owner of all the things which you have got together? So that is what comes to man who gets wealth for himself and has not wealth in the eyes of God. It's such a beautiful ending to such a moving parable. So that what comes to the man who gets wealth for himself and has not wealth in the eyes of God. So the point of caution, which of course Jesus is making here, is that this greed, this avarice, this an internal urge to gather more and more is found in ourselves. And we keep on thinking that we have to gather more and more without thinking that there is going to be an end to our own lives, and that whatever we have gathered is going to stay here. And as there is another narrative which says that when a person comes back after actually putting some of his relative in the grave, the only thing which remains with that person who has died are the good deeds which he has taken with him to the Almighty. All his wealth which he has amassed is going to stay in this world. And if he has not used that wealth for the betterment of the society, then it's going to be a stigma. It's going to be like a bad patch on his own afterlife. So viewers, the beautiful way in which Jesus has actually guided us here is that we have to keep our wealth and our account with God. As is said by Jesus elsewhere, it is reported to have said that he said that keep your wealth where your heart is. And if your heart is with God, then your heart will always be with your wealth. So we have to make note that instead of greed, instead of being selfish, we have to be selfless. We have to practice this selflessness as far as we can. We have to look at others. We always think of our own selves. I, my future, my family, my children. So let us also look at other people around us. Let's not be so tunnel visioned, so narrow-minded, so narrow-visioned that we don't find people immediately in our surroundings, people who might be our relatives, people who might be living in our homes, or who are friends, who are our associates, who are in fact people who are really in a spot of bother. And instead of recognizing them by their faces, instead of looking after them, we are busy in amassing wealth for our own selves. May God help us, and may God protect us from this ever-increasing desire to gather more and more. If we have to gather more and more, then let it be for the cause of God. Let it be for the people around us. There is no harm in accumulating wealth as far as we think that accumulated wealth is not only going to serve us, it's also going to serve the society that we live in. So there is absolutely no harm in gathering wealth if the purpose of gathering that wealth is not only to feed ourselves in a reasonably good way, but also to look after the needs of the people around us. So viewers, with these words, we come to an end to the first segment of our study circle. And if you have any questions, kindly please proceed with these questions. I'm going to unmute your mic in case you have a question. And if there are no questions, then we'll proceed to the second part of our study circle. I can see one of the hands being raised up. Okay, Safia Khwaja, I'm going to unmute your mic. Kindly please proceed with your question.
Aslan, Dr. Shehzad, my question is that Allah has said that there is no force in religion. You can
Right.
accept it, you can deny it. Then could you please tell me why did Allah inflict such severe punishment on the people who rejected the messages of the different Rasuls he sent in the world, who addressed the people, and when they rejected their message, Allah inflicted all sorts of punishments on them.
Right. You see, the meaning of this word, like Rafid Deen or Mansha'a fal yu'min, Mansha'a fal yakfur, means that the Almighty has not forced a person. He has not compelled a person to adopt a truth. This is all that it means. It does not mean that if he adopts the wrong path, that he's not going to punish him. So what the Almighty is telling us, that He has not actually handled us or taken us forcefully to what the right path is. He has given the option to our own selves. So it is up to us to choose what the right path is, and up to us to choose what the wrong path is. However, if we choose the wrong path, we have to face the consequences. So these are two entirely different things which we must not relate to each other. One thing is that we have the freedom of thought to choose between good and right. And the other thing is that if we choose good, we will be rewarded. And if we choose something wrong, then of course we will be punished for that. So the consequences are something entirely different. However, the choice is ours. So this verse actually is relating to the choice aspect only. It's not relating to the consequences of the choice. It's like saying that if you do something for your own benefit, of course it will be of your own benefit. But if you don't do something for your own wrong, it will be for your own wrong. But the choice is ours. Like saying, for example, if a person smokes a cigarette, we cannot stop him from smoking. Of course, he knows that the evil effects of smoking are going to affect his lungs and his family also. So if we give a choice to a person to smoke or to do anything, it actually means that he or she has the choice to choose. As
No,
far
Dr.
as the
Shehzad,
effects of that choice are concerned, they are going to be there. So we
sorry,
must not confuse the effects.
I'm interrupting you. Sorry. What I meant was when he said about Iman, the messengers brought certain messages from Allah to the people to
Right,
accept Allah as a Tawheed and reject shirk. And
right.
when they did not accept them, then he destroyed those nations. That is
You
what
see,
I'm saying. That if he
right,
had given us a
yeah,
choice,
right.
why did he destroy the nations? That was my
You see,
question.
these are two different concepts that must not be related. One is the aspect of punishing people for their wrongdoings. This particular verse does not relate to that. This particular verse only tells us that in this world, until the Almighty has given us the respite for the messengers of God, this respite was till their own lifetime, and for the rest of the people, it is till the day of judgment. So, as far as the respite is concerned, it is there for us. But it tells us that as far as the choice that we make, then that's something which is going to affect ourselves. And as far as this verse is concerned, it does not relate to the that aspect in which a person has to make a choice regarding his religion, and then as a result of a wrong choice, he is punished in this world. That's an entirely different law of the Almighty, and this particular verse does not relate to that particular law. It relates to the general law in which a person can choose to be a good person or a bad person or to adopt faith. It's like telling us that we've not been compelled from our inside to do what we think is right, or I mean, we have the choice to do the right, or we have the choice to do the wrong. So this particular aspect just tells us that we have the freedom to choose right and wrong. We are not compelled by the Almighty to choose what the right is.
No, Dr. Sivan, I mean that Prophet Nuh, Prophet Saleh, the different prophets who came, when their
Right,
message was rejected, he told them to leave, and then he inflicted uh, all sorts of rain,
right.
tiddas, blood, and destroyed them. But when he says in the Quran that I'm not forcing you, accept it, it is up to you to have belief in me or you don't. But then his prophets uh, gave the message, and then all those qawmin were destroyed. That was puzzles
Yes,
me.
I do understand, and of course, this is how it happened. That is what I'm exactly trying to say. See, the verse only tells us that we are not compelled from our inside to do what the right is, what the wrong is. It's our own choice to accept the right and the wrong. But the consequences of accepting right and wrong, they are not dictated by this. They are dictated by an entirely different law of the Almighty. You must not relate the two with each other. If people got punished because they accepted, if they did not accept the truth, it was after the period of respite that they were given, and for them, the law was that if they would accept, of course, they would be rewarded, or else they would be punished. So, like Rafiddin and words like these, verses like these, basically tell us that it's our own choice to accept what right and wrong are. But if we accept wrong, then of course there is going to be some consequences, whether they're going to take place in this world or in the next. So that's a separate thing. I gave you this example that when I say you are choose to smoke, whether you smoke or you don't smoke, it's up to you. It's like telling you that you have the choice. But when you smoke, of course, you know that that's going to be very bad for your health, and you might ultimately, God forbid, have cancer and even die for that. So the consequences are something else, and the freedom to choose something is an entirely different thing. This verse is just telling us that we have the choice to choose, but the choice and the consequences of that choice, they are of course going to affect us, and that's an indifferent thing.
Thank you.
Okay, we're now going to move ahead. Okay, as far as the second part of our study circle is concerned, we are now going to take up some of the contemporary issues that we often speak about and talk about. Today, viewers, I'm going to present before you an aspect of the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which tells us how, in spite of being a prophet, he was still a human being, and in spite of being a prophet, he was a person who had emotions, who was not a superhuman as far as emotions are concerned, because at times we are given this impression that being a Muslim means that we should become devoid of emotions, of happiness, of joy, of sorrow, of of grief that we may come across. The prophets, and the example that I'm going to give you today is regarding one of the incidents which took place in his own life, and that is the death of his young son Abraham or Ibrahim, who was born of Maria the Copt. And he was very young. He was an infant, the child, when he was dying. And when he actually died, the prophet was called over by the people and said that he should express or see his dead child and pray for him. And what happened was when the prophet came to his slave lady Maria, and when he saw that that the child was lying dead there, he started to cry, and he was so taken aback by the situation that tears welled up in his eyes, and he started to cry. And the words that he spoke at that moment are simply historic. He said something to this effect, that my eyes are welled with tears, my heart is struck with grief, but I feel myself content with the will of God. Al-ainu tadma wal kalbu tahsun walakin arzi birizallah. Something to this effect. That my eyes are tearful. Wal kalbu tahzan. My heart is laden with grief, but I am satisfied at the will of the Almighty. And this actually tells us the balance which we have to maintain. Religion does not tell us that we should not be grief stricken. We should not feel sad when we come across these sad situations. No, it does not. It says that to feel these emotions, to cry at such instances is but natural, because all of us are human beings. Remember what the Prophet said, my eyes are welled with tears, my heart is struck with grief. So this is how we express this normal human sentiment, that whenever there's something wrong, whenever we come across these situations, we do have this phenomena in which we feel very, very sad. But in spite of this sadness, look what the Prophet said at the end. that I am happy with the will of God. I am satisfied because there is something which is with the will of God that perhaps today I'm not being able to gauge, I'm not being able to understand, but there is something good which is hidden in this incident. Therefore, I'm content with the decision of God. So, in spite of being very, very sad, in spite of being grief stricken, in spite of being sorrowful, which a person can be when some near one passes away, we have to be feel contentment in our hearts that whatever happened with the will of God. In other words, the point that is being made here is that something when happens, whenever some grief comes across us, it's not that we should stop our emotions. It is not that we should not cry, because crying is also a mercy of the Almighty. It gives us that relief. The Almighty and the Prophet, the way he conducted himself in this incident, tells us that we are not required to control our tears or not to cry on such instances. Of course, crying is something which comes naturally to us on such instances. The only thing that we need to do is try to remain as calm as possible in a while in which we think that whatever has happened with the will of God. So we have this beautiful balance that is being taught to us by the Prophet, that on one instance, on one hand, you can be a person of your own emotions. Whether you're happy or whether you're sad, you can express them. But if you're sad, if you express your tears, if your tears come out of your eyes, it's but natural. It's not expected for you to remain a stoic person, and you should not be tearful. What is expected is, in spite of these tears, we are people who are still happy with the will of God. And I think this is the balance that we all have to strive for. This is a balance that we all must try our best to attain, because this is what a human being is. He or she is a person who has a personality which is afflicted with good or bad emotions, happy or sorrowful emotions. And at the same time, whatever happens is something on which our heart should remain content sooner or later, because we think that whatever is happening by the will of the Almighty. And in the grand scheme of things, something is auguring well for us, which at the moment we might not be able to understand. And I think this is part of the Sirah, is something that we must keep on rehearsing every now and then, because it tells us how a human being is, and how a human being is not expected to be superhuman, and he is also not expected to be a person who should give up himself to grief in such a way that he forgets his creator, that he forgets that what has happened because of a certain cause, and because of the fact that he or she is being tried and tested by the Almighty. So with these words, dear viewers, we come to an end to this second part of our study circle as well. In case you have any questions regarding the second part, I'll be glad to answer them. Otherwise, inshallah, we'll meet next Saturday at the same time. And I see there are no questions. So, dear viewers, take care of yourselves. Inshallah, see you next Saturday at the same time. So it's Khuda Hafiz from here.